What's going on, everybody? It's Carmine from Barmine Tech. Today we're going to be talking about backing up your Proxmox server with Veeam. So if you're not familiar, I think within the last couple weeks, Veeam has fully made it work that you could back up your Proxmox VE server with their Veeam Backup and Replication software. We're going to go over some of the quirks and some of the limitations that it has and my thoughts of it, but we're also going to cover how to set it up and how to get going. So let's get right into that. So before we really get into it, let's just talk about some of the requirements. So I'm going to go over to the requirement page for it and we'll get right into this. So I am using a Server 2019 machine. It's a fresh VM that I just spun up. You could either run this on a physical box, or if you want to run it off a VM, that'll work fine as well. Over here, I'm just on the Veeam replication and backup page, and we're just going to scroll through over here to some of the requirements. So it has requirements for ciphers and algorithms. That's typical on software that's enterprise based. It's going to be because it needs it for encryption, whether you're encrypting your backups or anything else, but we're not really going to stress about that too much. If we come over here, we actually have our specs for the software. So it has a hardware requirement of an x86 processor. You need at least 4 cores, 8 gigs of memory, and then you need some disk space. So you need about 5 gigs. Of course, you're going to need a lot more considering that it's going to be running a Windows machine, so you're going to need minimum, I'd say 100. But for the actual software, it only needs maybe about 10 to 15 gigs, we'll say. Over here, we do have the supported OSs currently. So we have Server 2025, which is pretty much brand new. I think it just came out a few weeks ago. 22, 2019, 2016, 2012 R2, and 2012. These both are end of life, so I don't really think anybody would be running them. I mean, you might have an old machine in your home lab, but these are end of life. They're no longer getting updates, so they are a security threat. 2016 is coming up to end of life as well, so realistically, you should be running at least 2019 or newer. Other than that, we do have, you can run Windows 11, 10, and 10 LTS. 10 is probably going to be your solid option if you don't want to run a server OS, but if you want to, you can run 11. But it's really all up to you. On top of the OS, you're also going to need PostgreSQL, and then it's going to need like a SQL server if not. So this is stuff that Veeam will install alongside the Veeam installer. So you don't have to worry about getting this on the side unless you're somebody that already runs like a SQL server or a PostgreSQL server. Other than that, all these requirements are pretty much going to be installed throughout the Veeam server install, so we don't really have to stress about it too much. Like I said, I'm using the 2019 box just because of the capabilities, and I have it, so that's why I set it up. So we're just going to come over here to download now. So you could just search Veeam Backup. They do have a community edition, which is great, except that it limits you to 10 workloads. So I believe that means you can only back up about 10 machines. I could be wrong, but it's only a community edition, so you can only expect so much out of it. They do have licensing available if you're interested, but I don't really want to pay for it. We're going to go through, I'm going to sign up, and then I'm going to get my downloader, so we'll be right back. So like I said, you just got to fill out the little information. It makes you a little account and it gives you access to download it. Like I said, this is just going to give you either a free version or it's going to end up being the community edition after you set it up. If you are interested, you can buy a license and everything, but I'm not going to because I'm just trying it out to see if I like it. We're going to hit accept. It's going to download it. It is about a 12 gig install file, so we'll be back after this is all done. It'll be a couple minutes. All that downloads, I'm just going to take a little time to talk about some of our options with setting this up. So if you are running a physical box and you have extra hard drives, let's say, a terabyte, 2 terabytes, 3 terabytes, whatever it might be, you can make that as your backup repository in Veeam. We're going to cover this when we get through the installer and start setting it up, but you could use those drives as your storage space if you want for your backups. If you're running it off a VM like me, maybe your server's a mini server like mine and it doesn't have terabytes of data free, but you have a NAS or a Samba share, whatever it might be, a DAS, something like that, you could use that as well. I'm actually going to show you in this video how to set it up to use a NAS to configure your storage for your backup because I don't have enough storage for it on the machine. But like I said, it can go either way. Veeam's pretty good. It's going to be able to detect if you have like additional disks or anything. So if you do want to run it off a physical box, you can. Like I said, once that download's done, we'll be right back and then we'll start going through the install and the setup. Okay, so my download just finished. So I'm just going to come over and select the ISO to run it. We're going to click open. I'm going to minimize Chrome for now because I don't need it, and then it's going to open up this new folder. So it does mount the ISO image as a disk or as a drive, so you can run it right out of here. The only thing we need to do is come over to setup and click run. And all the setup process will vary depending on your machine, but it can take anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes, I'll say. It is a super simple install. It's straightforward. We're just going to click install when this pops up. A lot of it's going to be using the default options, but other than that, if you want to modify it at all, you can. Over here we have our options. So we're just using the basic Veeam Backup and Replication. This is going to give us the Community Edition. It's going to give us a little trial to see how we like it. And like I said, it also gives us the Community Edition, which is limited off the full software, but it is something that we can use in our home lab. So we can ignore these two for now. We're just going to click the one on top. And now it's just going to start up the wizard. So when the wizard pops up, we'll start going through the process of the install and we'll go from there. So after about a minute or so, it pops up with the license agreement. So this is just, the normal EULA that you'll get for any software. I'm going to click I accept. And like I said, for the most part, all this is going to be clicking through for next and using the default options. So it's right over here just telling me it's going to give us the Community Edition with 10 instances with limited functionality and personal use only. That's fine with me because I'm just using this as a test right now to see if I like this software. We're going to click next. From here, we're just going to get a system configuration check. So the installer is just going to be going through the machine to make sure everything's going to work properly and probably see what else it has to install throughout the process. So we'll let this run and we'll be right back when it's done. So over here we're going to get to the ready install page after a minute or so, and it's just pretty much going to give a summary of the machine and the service it's going to be using. So we're going to be using PostgreSQL, some of the other stuff that's going to be installed on the machine. So this is all good. Now we're just going to come over here and click install, and we're going to let this run to install. So this is the part that's probably going to take the longest. It can take anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes maybe, I'll say, and it's really going to come down to what you give your machine hardware wise. I gave myself only 4 cores, 8 gigs of RAM, so it's going to be a little bit slower for me, but it might be quicker for you. But we'll be right back after this install is done. Alright, and about 10-15 minutes later, like I said, you'll have the process all done. So this installer does take a while because it installs all the other dependencies and add-ons that you need. So that's why it does take a little bit, but we're all done, so we're going to click finish. We can close this out now because we're done. And now over here we have a new icon on our desktop, and you can see it's the Veeam Backup and Replication console. We're just going to click on that to open it up. And as long as you're running everything off the same machine, like you're trying to connect to your Veeam console off of the same server, you can just leave it at localhost. If you're trying to connect to Veeam off of something else, then you're going to have to change it into the IP. I'm just going to click connect, and should just log us right in, and we should be all set in about a minute or so. It is our first login, so it's probably just going through and checking everything. So now we can see we're starting to load up, and here we have the splash screen for the program. So once this loads up, we'll get started and start setting everything up so we can back up our Proxmox server. Okay, so when you first boot into Veeam Backup and Replication for the first time, you're going to see a window like this. There's a lot to look at, but we're not really going to go too crazy with it. Like I said, right now we're just using the Community Edition, so currently this is what we don't get access to, which is fine. Like I said, I'm just doing it as a test, and you might be too, so it's no big deal. If you do choose to go with this further on, you may need to see about getting a license so you get support, additional access to use the software. So now that we have this all going, we need to actually start setting up Veeam to have some space to back up to. So the first thing we're going to do is come over here to the left, and we're going to click Backup Infrastructure. And over here you're going to have Backup Repositories. We're going to click on that. Now over here you can see that we have the backup repository, which is just going to be using a portion of our C drive. It just makes a folder on there that has some space. I don't want to do that because I'm not going to have enough space. It only gives me 44 gigs. Like I said, I'm going to be using something off of this machine, like a NAS. You could either use something else if you have another disk in this machine, or like if you want to do it like I am and use a NAS, you could do it that way as well. All I did to my NAS was add a file share off of it for Veeam backups, so it's just something separate, and I'm just going to be using my regular account. I would recommend to make like a Veeam service account that only has access to that file share and nothing else, just for security purposes. So all I could do is write and read off of that file share for your Veeam backups. So I'm just going to come over here and unclick off of this default one, and now over here you can see we have add repository, and now it's going to give us some different options. Like I said, we could use a DAS, a NAS, we can use a deduplicating storage appliance. So this is more of if you have enterprise grade equipment like Dell servers or whatever else, you'll have some specific processes for there. And then we have some other stuff like to the cloud and object stuff. We're going to use NAS, or network attached storage, because that's what I have access to. And we're going to use an SMB share. Now we can come over here, we're going to have a wizard to set up our backup repo. So I'm just going to name it. So I'm going to call it NAS Veeam. And then we're going to click next. If you want to put a description in any of these, you can, but I'm just going to leave them for the autofill. Now over here is where we're going to put the file path to our server. So for me, it's going to be at a specific IP. So I'm just going to type that in. I forgot what I made my file path, so I just had to double check. I just made mine Veeam, so we can just type that in right there. If you have like a domain name or you use DNS, you could put that in here, but I'm just going to put it right there. And now we do need to add credentials. So if you have it as, user only, you have to add that in here. If you don't, it has, access to everybody, then you could leave this default. I'm just going to add my credentials real quick. And then we're going to click OK. And now it added in the credentials. And now we're going to click Next. And what this is going to do is verify you can access the share. For all this stuff, I'm going to pretty much leave it default. You can change it as you need if you find any issues as you go along, but now it's just saying that it can connect, and this is our free space we have. I'm going to click Next again. Now for the backup operation, it's going to mount it to pretty much cache the backups for the snapshot of the servers or the VMs or whatever you're backing up. This just makes it so it's quicker to transfer it along. So this is just asking, if you want to move where it's going to mount it to. I'm just going to leave this default again. So we're going to click Next. Over here, it's just going to give us a review. Like I said, everything we're pretty much going to be leaving default because the default options are going to work the best for us. I'm going to click Apply, and now it's going to start the process of adding this new backup repository. And you can see it's going pretty quickly, so once this is all done, we'll be able to click Finish and go to the next step. So it only took maybe another 30 seconds, and we're all set. We're all green, so we're good to hit Next. Now it's just going to give us the summary, so that just is pretty much telling us that we made a new backup repository called Veeam, or whatever you named yours. I'm going to click Finish, and now we can change the configuration backup location to the newly created. I'm going to click Yes because that's what I want to use. So now that we have our backup repository set, we actually need to add our Proxmox server. To do that, we're going to come over here to the lower left, right above Backup Infrastructure. We're going to go to Inventory. And here we're going to click Add Server. So this is where we're going to add our Proxmox server, or if you're using something else in your home lab, you could do that as well, but today we're focusing on Proxmox. We're going to come over here, and now we just need to enter our IP address. So I'm going to be working with the BarMineTech mini server. I'm just going to go over and grab the IP of that really quickly, and we'll be right back. Okay, so my IP is .237, so I'm just going to type it in. You're going to put in whatever your IP address is, or if you have a DNS name. And again, if you want to change the comment, you can. I'm just going to leave it as the autofill. We're going to click Next. It's going to verify you can reach out. And now over here, you need to access the credentials to access the Proxmox server. So unfortunately, it only works by using the root credentials. You can't add like another service account and go from there, so you can only use that root account that's set up. I'm just going to add that in. We're going to click OK. We're going to click Next, and now it's going to verify it can connect with SSH. And now it's just asking if we want to accept the fingerprint. We're going to click Yes. And now it's just validating our connection, and everything should be successful. And then from there, we should be able to start using this server as one of our servers that we could back up. So we're just going to let this finish reaching out and connecting, and then we'll get on to the next part. So now over here we have storage for the snapshots. So it's just going to ask you which disk you would prefer to snapshot onto. I'm just going to leave it the default for the largest available because I don't have a lot of extra disks in this machine that I could choose from. So I'm going to click Next. Over here, it's just going to start applying the options. So by doing this, it's just going to register the server with Veeam and then go through the other configurables it has to do. So Veeam can reach out to that server and be able to back up and replicate off of it. So I'm going to let this run through and then we'll be right back. Okay, and this process only took about 25 seconds. You can see it actually times it over here. So we're all set. We can click Next. And again, it's just giving us a summary of what we did. So I'm going to click Finish. And now it's going to give us a message saying that it does require one worker VM. So what this does is it pretty much is a middleman. So it's going to install another VM onto your Proxmox server just so it can kind of go through and do the work as of being able to reach out to the other VMs, grabbing them to snapshot and work off of there. So I'm going to allow it because without it, you can't do this. So I'm going to click Yes. Over here, we're going to just name it. So I'm going to call it Veeam Worker. And then if you want, you could choose the storage. I only have the one disk like I said, so we're going to click Yes. And then again, I'm going to leave the default options. We're going to click Next again. Now over here, we need to add the network. So it needs to be, I'll have an IP address. If you have multiple adapters, make sure you're choosing the right one so we can get a network address. And then I'm going to let it use DHCP. I'm going to click OK again and hit Allow. Apply, sorry. And then over here, it's just giving us our summary. I'm going to click Finish, and then over here it's going to set up the worker VM, and then it's going to test the connection to make sure everything works. So if I minimize this right here and I open up the Barmine Tech server, you can see right now I just have the Ubuntu machine, but in a minute it's going to reach out and it's going to start creating another VM, and you can see it is right here, and it's actually showing it in the logs as well. So this is going to be my worker VM, and now we can do our first thing to set up our first backup job. So I'm going to come over to home. We're going to hit up in the top left to click new backup job. We're going to do virtual machine, and now we can either call it whatever we want. So we can call it Barmine Tech Server Backup, and I'm going to leave the default again for the description. We're going to click next, and now over here we're going to select what VMs we want to back up. So I'm going to click add over here. I'm going to drop down, and now you can see it sees the cluster, and now we can open it one more time. And after a second to load it up, and you can see it sees my Ubuntu machine. So this is the only thing that's on here, and we're going to click to back it up. So this is a VM. The one thing that's not currently available in Veeam for Proxmox backing up is that it can't back up LXC containers. So unfortunately, if you're somebody who uses a lot of LXC containers, Veeam is not going to be able to back those up just yet. I'm going to guess that in the future they will get a availability for that, but currently all you can do is back up your VMs. So like I said, I'm just going to back up this Ubuntu VM. I'm going to click OK. Now we're going to come over here to click next because that's all I want. And now we're going to change over the backup repository. So you can see I have the default and then that one we made before. I'm going to do it over here so it moves over to my NAS. Now we have our retention policy. So if you plan to do a lot of backups, you might want to change how long it holds onto your backups because the data is going to build up pretty quickly. I'm not going to do them too often, so I'm going to leave it the default. But if you want to make it so it cuts out some of your older ones, you can drop the retention policy lower. You could also set it for keeping certain backups for archiving purposes. In your home lab, you might not really need that, so you could probably ignore that for now. We're going to click next. And now we could either schedule the job or we can just run it manually. So if you want to schedule it, you can, but I'm not going, so I'm just going to click apply. So now it's going to create our backup job, and then after this is all done, we'll be able to go over and run it. So I'm just going to click finish. It just gives us the summary. Okay, so at this point, I seem to have run into a little bit of an issue. I didn't have this issue last night on my test machine, so that's why I wasn't aware of it. But it turns out that the Veeam worker, it needs its resources to have its CPU and everything else on that machine you're trying to back up, being your Proxmox server. So because I am trying to back up the Barmine Tech server, which is just a little mini PC, there's not enough resources on there. So luckily I still have my original Veeam test machine that I have. I'm going to be working off of that, and I'm going to be backing up a node off of my home lab server that I run right now. So I'm just going to back up one of the VMs off of that, and we're going to go through that process right now. Just looking at my Proxmox server right over here, you can see I have a couple of VMs over here, and we're going to work with this Waza machine. So this was just another server that I spun up something to test with. So I'm just going to come back over here into my machine. You can see I have my node over here, and I'm going to come over to home. I'm going to make a backup job, and nothing else has changed. The server's set up completely the same as everything else. So we're just going to do over here is backup demo, and we're going to click next. I'm going to add the VM that I want to do. So we're going to come over to Waza. So that's my machine I'm backing up. We're going to click next, and then everything else is going to be the same like we just went through. So I'm just going to run it through, hit apply. It's going to create my job for me, and then we're going to run that in just a minute. So like I said, I just had the issue that I don't have enough resources on that other server. So we're going to come over here to run the job, and we're going to run through this and let it run. It does take a little bit of time, which is fine, but if I come over here, we can see that I actually have a successful one that I did last night, and you can see this is what it looks like when it's completely done. It's going to tell you it's a success, and it's going to give you the notes of what it's going to do. So you can see over here, it took about 5 minutes to do this backup last night. So we could let this continue to run. It's no big deal. And then we're going to have our backups off of Veeam, and then we'll be able to restore from Veeam as well. Okay, so like I said, I have this backup from last night. Nothing on this machine has changed since, so I'm just going to go through how to restore from here. So back over here on the Home tab, we're going to click Home, and then you can see I have Restore over here. So this is where it's actually going to give us the option to restore one of our backups back to that Proxmox server. So I'm just going to select it, And now we have some different options where we can do restore the entire machine. You can restore individual files. You can export the disk, so you have like an OVA or whatever file it generates that you can try to use again, or you can publish the disk. I'm just going to do an entire machine restore. We're going to restore from the Proxmox Veeam Backup, and then it's going to come over here. We can select our successful backup. So I'm just going to select my backup that I have over there. We're going to click next. It's just going to do a little check, and now over here we just have our restore mode. So we can either restore it to the original VM, or we can restore it to a new location. I just want to do a in-place restore and push it right back to that same VM. We're going to click next, and it's just going to say about the warning, so that's fine. We're going to click yes. I'm going to skip through, I don't need a reason, and we're going to click finish. So this is just going to go through, and now it's going to start our restore. So you can see over here, it's just getting everything ready on the Veeam side, and then it's going to be able to push out to restore that VM. I can let this keep running, but pretty much that's it. That's how the restore function of Veeam is going to work. So I'll just let this run in the background, but that's how you do it. So that's pretty much everything to know about how to set up Veeam and do your own backups and replication through it for your Proxmox server. Like I said, I just ran this as a VM off on one of my servers. You can do this as a standalone box if you have extra hardware and you have another disk or whatever you want to use, or if you want to save it to like a NAS or a SAN, whatever you might have in your home lab. I don't know, you could use that for this. This was just a quick demo of how to set it up, but yeah, that's how we set it up. So now we can talk about some of the other things about Veeam for backing up your Proxmox server. Like I said, it can't back up your LXC container. So if you're somebody like me who uses a bunch of LXC containers, you're kind of out of luck because you can't back them up yet. Veeam probably is going to add that on in the future, but unfortunately we don't have that now. It is a licensed software. There is a community edition, but there is limitations to it, so you can only get so far without getting a license. I mean, we could probably make it work, depending on how big your home lab is. If you're somebody who just runs a few VMs, this will probably work really well for you. But if you're somebody who has a larger infrastructure, maybe you run a larger server with a lot of VMs and a lot of LXCs, this might not be the best option for you at this point. But it might be in the future. I'm not sure, because they're still integrating more features and they're still building it out to be a better tool to back up your Proxmox server. Now, Veeam is great. We use it all the time at my job. It's something we deploy for a lot of our clients, and it works really well. However, I don't know if this is going to be the best product to use currently for your Proxmox server. It works really well, but we do have Proxmox Backup Server. Proxmox Backup Server is an option that only requires one OS. It installs everything by default, and it just works really well. There's no extra things you need to add on, like a worker agent. You don't need additional VMs, and we don't need a lot of strong stuff to run it. I run my Proxmox Backup Server off a little mini PC that has a Pentium chip in it and, I don't know, 8 gigs of RAM. So you really don't need a lot to run it, and it works really well. If we want to set up a Veeam server, we need some sort of Windows box, whether it's server or 10 or 11. So already we're talking about a minimum of 100 gigs. We need at least 4 cores and 8 gigs of RAM just off the start, and that's just for the minimum specs to run it. And then from there we still need to install Veeam, so we need a lot of extra steps to get that running. Proxmox Backup Server doesn't have a lot of requirements, and it is one install, and then you just set it up and you get it going from there. I'm not here to kick Veeam. I do like the product. I think it's really good. I wanted to run it originally before I even knew about Proxmox Backup Server, but it didn't accept Proxmox at that point. Now it does. It's really going to come down to your preferences. If you don't mind buying a license so you can back up more stuff, so be it. That's fine. Personally, I rather just have it where I can install the backup server, one OS, one install, one setup, everything's done. There's just a lot of extra steps with the Veeam server, which is fine. It's another product that's out there, but for now I'm going to keep using the Proxmox Backup Server because it can back up my LXC containers, it can back up my VMs. Everything's integrated very easily through Proxmox. I could back up and restore through my Proxmox management. I don't need to jump back and forth between my backup server, my Proxmox server. Everything's in one place, and it's just simple to work with. So I think for now I'm going to stick with Proxmox Backup Server, but if they do get some more add-ons and some new features to the Veeam option for Proxmox, we might check it out again in the future, but for now I'm sticking with Proxmox Backup Server. As always, I'll have links to all the gear in my home lab down below if you ever want to check any of it out and get it for yourself. I'll have a link to the Discord server if you guys ever want to chat. Other than that, I want to thank you all for watching. I will see you in the next video.